Good morning. I would like to pick up where I left off last night. For those who were here last evening, there is something wafting through our air that spells change. Perhaps change that will be irreversible. Perhaps it will be change that will be catastrophic. The interesting thing, I think, as you look over time, particularly in the ice record, looking back 800,000 years, there's this correlation between temperature and carbon dioxide. And some of the critics have argued that in fact the temperature actually led carbon dioxide in some cases, and I think there may be some truth to all that. In our current setting, though, we've gone from about 281 parts per million to this year probably we will hit 387 parts per million. So we've increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the air 36%. What I'd like to do is talk about how that has had an impact on nature and how nature is responding to that change. Because as we proceed ahead, we are going to have profound impact on the things that I care deeply about and I know you care deeply about. We cannot continue to have this kind of pattern without seeing the temperatures change, as Dr. Peterson has pointed out to us. A couple really key points. One, we are outpacing the worst case scenario of the IPCC reports that were the fourth report just issued here 2 years ago. And over my lifetime, when I first was introduced to the notion of global warming, we were adding about 0.7 parts per million of carbon dioxide net to the atmosphere each year. Today, it's somewhere around 2.1 to 2.4 net each year. That may drop off this year as a result of the economic downturn, but nonetheless, it is clearly there. The critics have also suggested that Antarctica is not warming up, and in fact was cooling and was accumulating more snow. We've since learned that that's not true, particularly as we look at the breakup of the Larsen B ice shelf and the Wilkins earlier this year and late last year breakup. The thing that has my attention probably more than anything else is what's going on in the North Country. I wrote an editorial in our magazine and I titled it "Looking North and Seeing Our Future," because in fact the changes in the Arctic I think have a more profound impact on our future than we'd like to believe at this point. Not only is it changing the way air moves on our planet, but also the way water moves in our oceans. And for me, the most striking thing is what's been happening to the Arctic ice surface itself. I mean, here we have an ice mass the size of the United States minus Arizona. And that ice mass is bouncing about 90% of its energy back into space. So we have this wonderful reflector that is helping to keep the North Country cool. And we replace that with ocean waters that are now open and absorbing about 80% of the energy as the season progresses. And this is 2007, a record melt in the Arctic. I won't go into the details of that melt, but to simply let you see day by day what took place and how much the Arctic melted in one single season. And so we get into this late fall period on the 23rd of September in 2007, and you have this vast open water that's now absorbing energy, about 80% of the energy that comes in. And you can see from this chart that the melt of the Arctic is actually outpacing what the IPCC models had suggested. I was quoted 2 years ago in Time magazine saying that polar bears would probably be headed for extinction around 2060, and I was basing that on these IPCC models of the disappearance of the Arctic. And you can see now what's happening to the Arctic. It's very, very much outside of what we thought then. And I should say that 2008 melt, because of the loss of perennial ice, was also a very significant shift and change and something that we need to continue to pay attention to. Scientists are still uncertain about when we will see an ice-free Arctic, but there's about an 80% chance of seeing that in 2013 to 2020, according to some of the estimates that I've seen. And that's not good news not only for the Arctic, but for all of us. The tipping point in the Arctic might be happening now, and with the tipping point goes the polar bear. The polar bear is our northern sentinel. It stands as a warning for what is going to happen to all of nature, and I will talk more about that in this presentation. But I also want to talk about some of the other things that are happening in the Arctic that are equally important and perhaps even more important. We now know that the Arctic stores great quantities of carbon. And in fact, a recent study shows that it's about 60% higher than we previously thought. So there's enormous stores of carbon underneath the frozen ice. And if you can imagine your freezer at home being loaded with food, and all of a sudden someone comes along and pulls the plug on it and lets things start to rot. And as they rot, they give off gases, they give off nasty gases as well as carbon dioxide. And that's exactly what's happened to this North Country. And in fact, if you look at the frozen tundra here, you'll see, particularly in the blue, where we have this frozen tundra, which locks up this organic matter that's been parked there for thousands of years. The daily ice loss is also variable in the Arctic region. You can see this by this chart here. In the various Arctic region, you see a very, very different pattern. In fact, look at Siberia, the warm-up that's occurred in Siberia. Permafrost thawing is something we need to pay very close attention to, and I think it's been underestimated because we were thinking the Arctic was going to be around a lot, the Arctic ice was going to be around a lot longer than it is. And we now know that there was a study done a couple years ago suggesting 70, 80 billion tons of methane might be released from the Arctic, particularly in the Siberian tundra. We see this as warming up from various studies, and we also just about a year and a half ago saw a study done by Dr. Katie Walter and others that determined that the amount of methane coming off of these thermal karst lakes that are scattered throughout particularly the Siberian region, but throughout the North Country, are producing about 5 times more methane than they earlier had predicted. So Katie's basically saying, folks, pay attention, we're giving off a lot more methane. And here's Katie and her students.
Oh my God.
This is a wetland frozen in the wintertime. You can see the methane coming off of this system.
Whoa.